The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias manifesting in two principal ways. Unskilled individuals suffer from illusory superiority, mistakenly rating their ability much higher than is accurate. This bias is attributed to a metacognitive inability of the unskilled to recognize their ineptitude. Those persons to whom a skill or set of skills come easily may find themselves with weak self-confidence, as they may falsely assume that others have an equivalent understanding. See imposter syndrome. David Dunning and Justin Kruger of Cornell University conclude, the miscalibration of the incompetent stems from an error about the self, whereas the miscalibration of the highly competent stems from an error about others. Proposal. The phenomenon was first tested in a series of experiments published in 1999 by David Dunning and Justin Kruger of the Department of Psychology, Cornell University. The study was inspired by the case of MacArthur Wheeler, a man who robbed two banks after covering his face with lemon juice in the mistaken belief that it would prevent his face from being recorded on surveillance cameras. They noted earlier studies suggesting that ignorance of standards of performance is behind a great deal of incompetence. This pattern was seen in studies of skills as diverse as reading comprehension, operating a motor vehicle, and playing chess or tennis. Dunning and Kruger proposed that, for a given skill, incompetent people will tend to overestimate their own level of skill. Fail to recognize genuine skill in others. Fail to recognize the extremity of their inadequacy. Recognize and acknowledge their own previous lack of skill, if they are exposed to training for that skill. Dunning has since drawn an analogy with a condition in which a person who suffers a physical disability because of brain injury seems unaware of or denies the existence of the disability, even for dramatic impairment such as blindness or paralysis. If you are a unregistered trademark re-incompetent, you can't a unregistered trademark T no you are a unregistered trademark re-incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. Supporting studies, Dunning and Kruger set out to test these hypotheses on Cornell undergraduates in psychology courses. In a series of studies, they examined the subject's self-assessment of logical reasoning skills, grammatical skills, and humor. After being shown their test scores, the subjects were again asked to estimate their own rank. The competent group accurately estimated their rank, while the incompetent group still overestimated theirs. As Dunning and Kruger noted, across 4 studies, the authors found that participants scoring in the bottom quartile on tests of humor, grammar, and logic grossly overestimated their test performance and ability. Although test scores put them in the 12th percentile, they estimated themselves to be in the 62nd. Meanwhile, people with true ability tended to underestimate their relative competence. Roughly, participants who found tasks to be relatively easy erroneously assumed, to some extent, that the tasks must also be easy for others. A follow-up study, reported in the same paper, suggests that grossly incompetent students improved their ability to estimate their rank after minimal tutoring in the skills they has previously lacked, regardless of the negligible improvement in actual skills. In 2003, Dunning and Joyce Erlinger, also of Cornell University, published a study that detailed a shift in people's views of themselves when influenced by external cues. Participants in the study, Cornell University undergraduates, were given tests of their knowledge of geography, some intended to affect their self-views positively, some negatively. They were then asked to rate their performance, and those given the positive tests reported significantly better performance than those given the negative. Daniel Ames and Lara Kamrath extended this work to sensitivity to others, and the subject's perception of how sensitive they were. Research conducted by Burson et al. Set out to test one of the core hypotheses put forth by Kruger and Muller in their paper Unskilled, Unaware, or Both. The better-than-average heuristic and statistical regression predict errors in estimates of own performance, that people at all performance levels are equally poor at estimating their relative performance. In order to test this hypothesis, the authors investigate 3 different studies, which all manipulated the perceived difficulty of the tasks and hence participants' unregistered trademark beliefs about their relative standing. The authors found that when researchers presented subjects with moderately difficult tasks that the best and the worst performers actually varied little in their ability to accurately predict their performance. Additionally, they found that with more difficult tasks, the best performers are less accurate in predicting their performance than the worst performers. The authors conclude that these findings suggest that judges at all skill levels are subject to similar degrees of error. Erlinger et al. Made an attempt to test alternative explanations, but came to qualitatively similar conclusions to the original work. The paper concludes that the root cause is that, in contrast to high performers, poor performers do not learn from feedback, suggesting a need to improve. Studies on the Dunning-Kruger effect tend to focus on American test subjects. A study on some East Asian subjects suggested that something like the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect may operate on self-assessment and motivation to improve. East Asians tend to underestimate their abilities, and see underachievement as a chance to improve themselves and get along with others. Awards. Dunning and Kruger were awarded the 2000 Satirical Ig Nobel Prize in Psychology for their paper, Unskilled and Unaware of It, How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Led to Inflated Self-Assessments. Historical references. Although the Dunning-Kruger effect was put forward in 1999, Dunning and Kruger have noted similar historical observations from philosophers and scientists, including Confucius, Bertrand Russell, and Charles Darwin, whom they quoted in their original paper. Geraint Fuller, commenting on the paper, noted that Shakespeare expressed similar sentiment in As You Like It. See also. References.